All right, that's our cue. Thank you so much for joining this session. I was told this is one of the most anticipated and trending sessions of the whole forum. And also, since this is an open session and live broadcast, our audience members are all very welcome to tweet any comments, any quotes from this session with the hashtag AMNC24. First, I would like to introduce our speakers today, all top-notch experts in the field of AI. Professor Xi Kang, she's an assistant professor of Owen School of Management at Vanderbilt University in the US. And Ms. Nancy Xu, she's the founder and CEO of MoonHub AI, based in California, Palo Alto. Right. Mr. Liu Jiren is the chairman of Newsoft, one of China's premier and largest software companies. Dr. Liu is also one of China's first PhDs in computer science. Last but not least, Mr. Darko Matovsky. He's the CEO of CausalLens, a London-based AI company. As some of you may know, causal AI is a very different approach to AI than what we know best these days, the most popular large language models. That is something we'd also like to very much discuss with you later. The topic today is about AI agents or AI assistants and their application in our daily lives. But first, I would like to ask all of our speakers to say something about your definition of AI agents or assistants, because this could be a very narrow concept. It could also be very broad, from software to hardware, from phones to wearables to cars. It seems these days AI has empowered so many different services and products. Any one of them could have some kind of AI agency, and that is something I would very much like our experts to explain what you think AI assistants, AI agents are, especially in terms of your sector, your company, your organization, and at the same time, of course, tell us something about your work in the related field. Shall we start with Professor Kang?
Sure, I love that. Yeah, I totally agree with the idea that is subject to your own interpretation of what defines an AI assistant. Personally, I see any algorithm or models powered by AI or related technology that could make predictive, especially predictive machines that can help people make predictions about the future or make decisions. If it is approachable enough for laymen to interact with it, to get some insights from it, I would view that as an AI assistant or AI agent.
Thank you. Darko?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I subscribe to the broader definition. Here, I think we're going to end up in a world where 99% of all intelligence is artificial. And the 1%, the human intelligence, will act as a backstop to the 99% of artificial intelligence. Now, we're not there yet, and we're not ready for that world, but that's the world we are embarking to create. In that world, we will need to choose, depending on a use case, where is the line between autonomy and control? Where does the 1% of the human intelligence need to dedicate their time? There's going to be many applications in which you can have fully autonomous agents, and that's cool. And there's going to be many situations in which you want a high degree of oversight of the humans. So I think that's the most interesting area, will be where do we spend that 1% of human intelligence to oversee the agentic workflows?
Thanks for the great question, Wang, and 大家好. So, you know, when I think about AI agents, I really think about it from the perspective of a digital companion. And let me elaborate a bit more in terms of an enterprise use case. I think about it as a digital employee. But the most important thing, I think, is like the agency piece of the AI agents, where you can actually traditionally, you know, when I was doing my PhD at Stanford at the time, a lot of the work was on sort of building intelligence or building context. And now we have gotten to a point where you can actually give these models agency. They can do things that humans can actually do in the real world. And And I think this sort of unlocks three different interesting opportunities when it comes to companies. The first is the ability for us to have transformative new experiences that you might not be able to have with a traditional person. You know, an AI agent can respond to your messages 24/7 when a person is asleep at 2 a.m. in the morning. I think the second part is actually the ability for us to actually build systems that are not just, you know, a lot of people talk about AI agents automating human work, but I think there's an opportunity to build something that is superhuman in ability. And, you know, we've seen at Moon Hub is, you know, you can build AI recruiters, but, you know, wouldn't it be great if you could build something that even an AI recruiter can't do today, see more people, filter more at the scale that people can't do. And then the third piece I think that is very interesting that is unlocked by AI agents is this idea of what it means for human work in the future. And specifically, I think we are going to reckon a little bit in the next 5 to 10 years with the idea of what is actually uniquely human labor and what is actually something that AI can do. And you know, I think about it as a sort of combination of silicon talent or AI agents and biological talent, which is what humans can do, and creating that synergy between the two.
Yes. Dr. Liu?
这个 AI agent 是一个比较技术的一个特别是最近在 AI 的这个发展上的一个技术的一个很大的一个变化那我认为 AI agent 第一个就是它的自主性我们中文把它叫做智能体我们有自己的这个 term 这个翻译过来叫智能体。第一个它是自主的，也就是它可以不用和人过多的指示，可以自主的做出决定，给一个输入就可以做出决定。第二个，它自己是可以感知的，它可以感知其他的智能体或者说其他的物体和它的环境，它能够把这个感知变成一个学习的一个过程这个是它这个智能体的一个很重要的一个特征另外一个，它自己能够做出判断并且能够take action 就是说能够执行一些活动。还有一点很重要的就是我们的很多的 AI 都是通用的一个就是对所有的人都是一样的。那我们的智能体可以是特别个性化的满足每一个个人特别需要的人工智能走向下一个阶段，走向通用的人工智能AI 的智能体是通向通用人工智能的一条道路。
Thank you so much. My colleague just reminded me I forgot to tell you who I am. Sorry about that. I'm your moderator for this session. My name is Wang Feng. I'm the editor-in-chief of FT Chinese, the Chinese edition of the Financial Times, where we also do tons of journalism on AI. I also teach part-time students and mentor students about how to cope with challenges of AI in the near future. When we talk about AI agents, I think a lot of people in this room will instantly think about that movie. You know which one I'm talking about. So this already more than a decade old, the movie Her. When ChatGPT released GPT 4.0, there was a lot of talk about how it reminds everybody of that movie. And it was a misnomer. They called it an OS in the movie. But what it really is a super intelligent AI agent. And this is what our speakers have talked about, AI gaining a certain level of human-like or even superhuman capabilities, having their own intelligence and judgment. And well, towards the end of that film, AI actually took control of their own fate. They decided to leave the humans behind because they're too advanced for the humans. So this leads naturally to my next question. Based on your work in your field of expertise, where do you think this is going? Does that movie resemble anything realistic from our vantage point today? Or is it going to be something even wilder, more different than the imagination of the artists and the wildest futurists can go these days? Professor?
Yeah, I have a rather conservative view. I think that what is portrayed by the movie, that is a benign version of a artificial general intelligence. It could be worse. It could be the Terminator. But I don't think that in the near future, like in 30 years, we're going to see artificial general intelligence that essentially are super intelligent. What we are developing and still working with right now are called the artificial narrow intelligence or weak AI, meaning that they are good at performing certain tasks that are predefined, well-defined, whether it being predicting a fraudulent transaction in a finance setting or writing, generate natural language. I think that those still fall into the category of artificial narrow intelligence, so I wouldn't worry so much about humanity just yet. But I think it's up for debate recently. Yeah. Let's hear what other people think about.
So I just want to caveat this first, that I'm techno-optimist, but I'm not so sure that it will take 30 years to get to AGI. I reckon that timeline may be a bit faster. I think there are emerging technologies in the field that are the ingredients or the missing links towards artificial general intelligence. And my company is developing one of those pieces. I think as someone that uses AI every day to solve some of the toughest problems, sometimes we get surprised how good it is. Now, I think the movie Her showcase a really interesting perspective on how AI agents are going to transform our personal lives. But what it didn't cover was even more interesting aspect, which is how it's going to transform our economy, how it's going to transform our companies, how it's going to transform how governments make decisions. I think that's not as interesting. It's not a movie type of material. But I would say that will move more the needle in how our lives will change, how our jobs will change, how governments are going to be making decisions. And I think in that world, again, we need to find a balance between what the AI agents do versus what the humans do. But it will unleash tremendous amount of productivity and potentially a massive improvement in decision making. If we look at how we make decisions today, it's all based on human gut feel. Even the most advanced organizations have very small number of real-world use cases of AI when it comes to decision making. Governments, of course, maybe even further behind. So there's this tremendous opportunity to use AI and AI agents and more advanced forms of AI as we develop them to transform completely how we make decisions in our society, which will lead to more equitable, more efficient, better societies. There's huge opportunity for GDP growth, better distribution, all sorts of opportunities that we can create. So I think that for me is the most interesting area that we should be all talking about. Although it's not as interesting and as talking about our personal lives, I think that's where we're going to make the biggest changes.
I was in another session this morning about AI and the workforce. The overwhelming concern and worry from that session was the impact, of course, of AI on the workforce and how we ensure equality instead of letting AI become this huge factor that could further exacerbate inequality in our world today. So the work that Nancy and her company does in terms of AI and helping using AI in the human resource management field in recruiting, that seems much more relevant and a direct address to one of the biggest concerns in this field.
Yeah, absolutely, and I totally agree with both of the other speakers. I think, when I look at the AI space, I think about it from the perspective of step functions, right? When I was a researcher at Stanford maybe 5 years ago, if you talked about, hey, we're going to build a digital employee, you probably get 5 PhD students, box of pizza, total science fiction. And I think in the last couple of years, we have started to see what was once science fiction become something that feels quite like an inevitable reality. And I think the implication of that is that we're going from a world where people sort of think about, everyone's talking about co-pilots, jobs aren't going to be automated. It sounds good when, business leaders say this, but I think the reality is there will be a piece of work, I would say double-digit percentage of work where more than 80% of that job will be done by the AI, and that will require us to think a lot about what I call sort of the AI talent revolution, where talent will need to sort of rethink, and we'll have to have the societal systems in place to help people find new opportunities and also upskill. And candidly, I think we do not have that today. Like, I think we face one of the big challenges is in the next 5 years, you're going to see millions of people suddenly realize, wow, 80% of the time that I normally spend on a day-to-day basis is now done by an AI, and what are we going to do that? And so, at MoonHub, the way we think about this is, we're the first to build an AI recruiter that's deployed to hundreds of companies out there. And what we've observed is that the companies that can actually deploy AI early on to solve this problem have a significant advantage because they're now able to scale faster, they're more competitive, and in a world where talent is traditionally the bottleneck for growth, I think the really exciting opportunity for AI agents is actually to compress the time scale that it takes to build ideas or companies to impact, and make it possible to do that in a much more compressed time frame. So think about your organizations, and think about if you, like I believe, that talent has traditionally been the bottleneck for growth for many of the major initiatives that we have as a society, what a world where sort of talent abundance could look like. And I think that's where we're headed, and that's what I'm super excited about.
Thank you. Apart from the general question of this round, I also want to add aspect for Dr. Liu as one of China's premier experts in computer science and AI. When it comes to competition between China and the West in the AI field, there seems to be a lot of conventional wisdom that China, being very good with applying previous technology breakthroughs in the consumer, in the industry-facing applications, should also excel in terms of finding solutions for AI in actual human society. This is one of China's strengths. Based on your work in this field, do you think this is true? And exactly where do you think, in particular for China, this industry headed?
I think, sorry, 我认为这是对的这种看法是对的。第一个呢，如果人工智能的技术今天在应用的时候，来得特别快，首先是跟数据有关系。中国会产生全世界最巨大的数据，特别是在通用大模型，可能中国跟世界跟美国的公司可能还会有很大的差距。但是，一旦要走向专业领域的应用的时候，比如说 healthcare，比如说这个 population management 人，这个就是中国有特别巨大的数据加上中国也是一个比较在这个领域里比较 aggressive 比较进取的一个国家，可能在美国西方国家谈更多的 regulation privacy 等等，这个时候中国呢是就是感觉上要比这些方面更开放一些那么从几大要素，算力、数据、算法事实上中国的科学家在算法方面不太差，可能在算力上由于半导体各个方面还会有一些距离，但是今天在算法和算力上的大的发展的趋势，越来越走向更便宜、更经济也就是说用更低的算力甚至在边缘计算来解决这些问题。所以我认为在这个方面，中国在人工智能这个领域里面，在未来的发展一定会在有些领域里走在世界的前列。这个不是因为完全的技术本身，而是这个技术所应用的综合的环境 这个在中国确确实实有很大的机会。
Great. Thank you, Dr. Liu, for raising data governance and AI regulation. That is something we're going to, I would like the whole group to discuss later. But first, I want to talk about different approaches to AI. When I learned that Darko was coming to the session, I was very happy because causal AI, the technology approach your company is focusing on, is very different from what's been known widely in the last 2 years as the most popular format of AI, large language models. It's different. Presumably, the application and real-life user cases would also be very different from what we have seen from most of the AI companies doing the most dazzling work in the last few years. So this is something I would like the group to discuss. The world has obsessed with large language models in the last 2 years, but there are actually many other potential approaches and different outcomes for this AI revolution. So, Professor, do you want to start with your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I wanted to hear about like what Darko has in mind, but my personal taste as a researcher is that I always wanted to know why. And I also always wanted to establish causal relationship as opposed to just correlational. On top of making predictions, I wanted to know what are the underlying mechanisms. So I'm all for your type of algorithm. Love to hear more.
Absolutely, yeah. So that's exactly it. We want AI that can understand the cause and effect relationships in the real world, like we do, like humans. In fact, the most popular book in the world of causal AI is called The Book of Why by Judea Pearl, who won the Turing Award on this topic. And so if you want the AI to be able to explain why it has done something, if you want your agent to be able to explain why it has done something, then the only way you can do this is with a causal AI technology. But to take a step back and just help the audience understand the differences between LLMs and causal AI and how they can come together to create something that is bigger than the sum of the parts. So LLMs obviously stand for large language models, which by definition means they're very, very good and excellent at understanding languages. And so anything you can express in a form of a language, whether it's coding, whether it's poems, letters, emails, those models are exceptionally good at it. In fact, most of us, even that are deep in the field, got caught by surprise. Even OpenAI themselves were surprised by the uptake. They're that good. Now, if you think about LLMs are going to solve language, that's great, but there's other types of data knocking around. In fact, in the enterprise, you have far more quantitative data, things like time series and tabular data, numbers. And so when you're trying to get the LLM to understand the numbers, it's kind of a mismatch of technologies. You're saying something that understands language should also understand numbers. That's kind of like taking a PhD in English and saying, hey, you now need to prove a theorem in mathematics. Those two things do not match. If you want to do both, though, if you want to create a multimodal world in which we can understand the numbers and the language and the vision, we need to create technologies that are specialized in this. So causal AI is good. It masters quantitative data, numbers. If you want to create a use case where you're combining the natural language interface, so imagine a use case. You ask about use cases. Imagine you're trying to understand how to retain more customers. Imagine if you were the analyst that is trying to do this, you could type into natural language, how do I retain more customers? Imagine if then the agent, rather than just predicting the next word, which is what LLMs do, had access to causal model that really understood the cause and effect relationships of why customers remain with your service, and was able to then ground itself to this causal model and answer all of these things through an agent that calls the causal model, then it can come back and give you a very reliable answer, again in a natural language. So to the user, it will look like they're using an LLM, but in reality, it will be grounded to a causal understanding of the world. And we believe that this is really the breakthrough technology that will unlock most of the use cases in the enterprise and in policy decision making.
Nancy.
I'm curious, how many people here actually know what GPT stands for? Okay, two speakers and one person in the audience. So GPT actually stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformers. And I think all three of those words have an interesting implication for where AI is headed. And I think all three have opportunities for the technology to be better. So generative basically means, traditionally when we look at ML research or AI research, it's about making these sort of predictions. Oh, should this person get the loan? Should this person, is this a cat or a dog? And generative is essentially this idea that now AI can actually create things on its own. It can write content. It can say things now with, the newest OpenAI releases. And the pre-trained part, I think, is very interesting because it essentially means that all of us can use one model that has broader real-world context, and we can all build on top of that single model. And I think that has had a lot of implications in basically having one organization invest a lot of money into building these massive models that we all benefit from. And the transformer part is sort of the architecture. Like, how do we, in a data-efficient way, learn about the world and train these models? I think, what I'm really excited about right now is advancements in all three of these. But in particular, for when I look at the work that we, for example, do at MoonHub, I think one of the biggest challenges is we still don't really have the what I call the software infrastructure layer for people to build really good agents today. So even if you had these open source large language models, what you need is sort of the ability to hook that up with actions on the web, right? These models, they need to be able to do things. You need to be able to hook it up with really good data, and that data is actually quite expensive today, as some of you might have seen. And I think what we'll need is a step function in the layer of that infrastructure, and then advancements in each of those three areas, so generative, pre-trained, and then the architecture itself.
Thanks. Dr. Liu.
我们今天讨论的 AI 的最终的一个目标所有人的追求的目标都是最终我们的机器的智慧要和人一样或者是超出人还要超出人，所以这是所有人的共同的努力。那么过去我们有什么专家系统通过符号的系统来变，今天有了大模型。大模型在人工智能这样的大的领域里，只是一个可能是如果看未来的话，正是发展中的一个阶段。那么它首先大语言模型是理解语言的那么当然用这个模型不仅可以理解语言了，可以理解图像了可以理解我们叫做多模态各种各样的数据源了。但是它的这种智慧解决专业问题的这些领域和做出决策，跟人的智慧的相比，这个差得很远。所以今天全世界有一大批科学家都在做不同的算法。我们听到的是大语言的模型，但是这个模型的背后有各种各样的算法，好多人都在努力来解决很多的问题。如果达到人的标准，比如说我举个例子，情感问题，这以后的机器要有感情像人一样，这个就需要专门的算法。伦理的问题伦理的问题就更麻烦了不同的国家还有不同的问题。公平性你不能算的结果只偏向于某些人，还要打造特别的公平，还有透明性。我们今天的算法做出的结论，我们大家看了可能产生个电影画个画翻译个语言交互，这些东西都不用太严肃事实上今天的结果，刚才我们谈到用什么时间我们的智能能达到我们期待的水平，可以说在人机的交互、写文章在翻译这些问题已经超出了我们人类的90%人的能力和期待你不会说西班牙语，你说中文就能出来了如果把这个当做一个例子的话，那么它已经完全的这个走到了我们过去不可想象的这个是因为我们大量的算力 这个很复杂的技术的发展。所以从这个意义上来看，我们看到今天我们讨论 AI agent， 这只是向更高智能的迈步的一个阶段。我们还提到 multi agent， 多个 agent 之间还可以沟通。我们还可以想象到未来我们每个人可能都会成为一个 agent， 跑到数字社会。200年之后，我们可以互相交流，还互相认识。那当我们如果想到这些问题的时候，那你会想象这是一个人工智能未来发展的趋势。所以现在的问题不仅仅是技术问题，可能我们更要担心的是，我们如何管理人工智能，如何治理人工智能，来符合人类真正自己的想法。当我们谈到 agent 可以自主的时候，那它就有安全性的问题因为它自己可以做很多的事情那如果我们的世界有成百上千万的 agent 又能够在一起工作的时候，那你想象的就是一个科幻的电影所以从这个意义上来看，我们今天还是一个很初级的阶段。所以在这个方面，我们一定会看到算力越来越便宜人工智能越来越成为每个人身边的工具算法也会不断的演变所以我们不要吃惊，1个星期之后又有了一个新的升级，也不要吃惊到今年年末出现了一个重大的事件，因为很多人你不知道的人都在努力的工作中。
Yes, now we come to the topic of regulation. As all of our speakers have touched on the topic one way or another in the last 30 minutes. I want to finish this round of questions within 10 minutes so the audience have some time to ask questions of our experts. So between China and the US and EU, all the major technology powers in the world, on the topic of AI, there's very little they agree on. There's very little they can work with each other on. Governance and regulation is actually one of the exceptions. The only ongoing dialogue between these powers, it seems, is about regulation. And China seems to have taken the first step. We already have more than a dozen AI-specific laws in China. That is something that's given a lot of thought to the other major powers as well. So on the topic of AI regulation, especially in terms of how we regulate the application of AI as it directly affects everybody's life, where do you think the world is going? Are we going to have bifurcating different paths, or is there going to emerge a kind of a consensus that the major powers can all think, well, this makes sense, this should be how we regulate and make sure AI is safe and equitable and everything for everybody in the future? Professor?
Yeah, my understanding is that governments might have different regulations, but eventually they will converge, partly because policymakers learn from each other's experience. And secondly, I think it's because a lot of the developers, major players in the space, are multinational firms, so they need to operate in not just one country. When Google operates in the EU, it needs to comply with GDPR, for example. So that is going to have a spillover effect. And currently, a lot of this initiative and regulations are a joint effort between the companies and governments globally, partly because they are the developers. They know where this technology is going towards. They know the limitations and where essentially the government, like the policy, should cut them a little bit slack to ensure that the technology can develop at an increasing speed. So I think this is a joint effort, and to my content, the developers, the big players, seems to be fully aware of the importance of developing responsible AI, not just for a greater humanity, but also for the sake of business.
Yes.
Yeah.
Darko?
Yes, I think the balance we need to get right is the balance between regulation and innovation. There's a world in which we can regulate too quickly. We may regulate with without having sufficient information, which will actually stifle a lot of the innovation that it's about to come. And there's this issue of regulatory capture, which means that if we, only the most resourceful organizations will be able to comply, and have a very long tail of startups that are going to be, potentially the future of this technology may not be able due to kind of financial means So I think we just need to think very, very carefully about when we regulate, what we regulate, how we regulate, and we need to kind of understand that this is a technology in its infancy, and we don't really know enough about it just yet. So I think regulation is great, but we just need to be, get that balance right and do it at the right time. So there may be, I just want to warn of the risk of premature regulation that, killing a lot of innovation that is to come. I think maybe we need a bit of time to let this technology get a bit of momentum, because we're really at the beginning. Now, putting regulation on the side, for me, what's really important is that we have AI that we trust, and that humans can actually understand what the AI is doing. If you take a LLM, even the developers don't know how it works. We talk about this emerging intelligence, which is great in use cases, like writing poems and things that don't hurt anyone, but not so good if you're doing a brain surgery, or you're making a major policy decision or major decision in your enterprise. In those cases, you better understand what the AI is doing and why it is making certain decisions. I think it all comes down to the word why. Why did the AI do something? We need to know that. And so the EU, obviously, loves to regulate things, but in the case of AI, I think they got that bit right of the regulation, which says, well, AI has to understand why, and it's to be able to explain why. And they actually even mention causal models as the way to achieve this for very high-risk situations.
Thank you. Yes.
I agree with a lot of what Darko says. I think at a very high level, it's important to segregate the technology from the actual use case and the applications. And I think at a very high level today, I think a lot of people, when they think regulating AI, it's like if someone told you, I think we should regulate the internet, or I think we should regulate the underlying infrastructure of the internet. And that is very different from what I think we should actually be doing, which is two things. One, I care a lot about making sure we use AI in a safe and responsible way, especially in our industry. HR is a very big thing. And helping people build trust for these systems. But separate from that, I think, the way, there's sort of two things. One is we do have to make sure we don't over-regulate the technology so that people can actually benefit from the positive use cases that can come out of it. And then to understand that it is not the technology that is inherently good or bad, but the way that we use it. And I think that is where there will likely be some difference in how different countries regulate, right? The HR policies in the US may be a little bit different from the HR policies in China. And I think it's more about a push of how do we understand the use cases and the potential and make sure we regulate those in an appropriate way. And then helping individual users or customers of any AI product to feel trust in that product. And today I think most organizations would not feel comfortable having an AI agent just go out and send their emails in and do things for them. And we have found the same when we deploy AI recruiters. And I think a big part of that is in the near term, actually having humans actually look over what the agents are doing, sort of being a guardrail for these AI systems until we build a sufficient level of trust for them.
Yes, if I may interject, one of the things I really appreciate as a journalist and educator about China's AI laws is that it requires internet content platforms to clearly label content that is AI generated or generated with AI assistance. That in our research and our teaching is invaluable, because there's always, I'm sure everybody has the feeling, when you see something, a video or a portion of text, you feel this is weird. This just doesn't read like human generated. I don't know if I can trust this. I think that's something that China seems to be going in the right direction. Dr. Liu, what's your thoughts?
Firstly, 我们已经大家都谈到了，就是 AI 的内容越来越由机器来产生，而机器是什么样的产生，我们并不太清楚。这样的一个大的趋势，未来一定会比我们治理的动作要来得快得多。这是我们今天要想治理所带来的最大的问题，就是当我们治理者还没有想怎么样治理这件事情的时候，技术已经大大的向前进了一步。比如说我们这个现在讲的 AI agent single， 那你还不知道怎么治呢？如果 multi agent， 可能带来的问题就会更多。所以在这个方面的治理会面对的巨大的挑战，就是它技术的迭代的速度。这个在今天这个数字的社会，我们社会的管理变成特别的复杂所以我相信未来的治理也要通过 AI，也要通过技术如果通过我们人来思考下一步会是什么怎么样，这个的挑战是十分大的。
Yes, using AI to govern AI. That's like in Chinese, 以子之矛攻子之盾. I think we have maybe time for 1 or 2 questions from the audience. Anybody? Anything to ask?
We have a hand behind
yes,
you.
please.
Hi, I am Valeria Tafoya. It's working? Yes. I am a global shaper from Curitiba, Brazil. My question is regarding if we're thinking about moving from large language models to large action models, and we already don't fully trust large language models, right? Nancy mentioned something about trusting just AI doing the thing. And how are we going to overcome this challenge of giving access to sensitive information from the organizations, or even people putting their jobs on stake because of trusting of AI agents?
I can take a quick stab at this. I think the way that we see this being solved is through the process of grounding. In other words, we need to allow the LLMs to use tools that we can fully trust. And so before they take an action into the real world and actually change something in the real world, we want them to have access to tools that are fully trusted. So we mentioned earlier a causal model may be an example of a tool that you can trust because it can explain exactly what it will do and will be able to explain the why. But that's not the only tool. There's many, many tools that are in development. And so if we let the LLMs use these tools and ground themselves, then we can trust them to execute in the real world.
I think there are two pieces here that we need to solve. The first is hallucinations, and the second is bias. I think once we solve those two, people will actually be able to trust these systems a lot better. But until we solve those two pieces, it will be very hard for people to trust it. And so the traditional challenge of hallucinations is if you use an AI model, to Darko's point earlier, the AI may tell you something that is factually incorrect or not grounded in reality. And the bias challenge, of course, is the fact that, let's say you're using AI to hire, it's showing you a bunch of white males, and that is not what you want your AI to mirror in the future society. And so I think on the hallucination point, it has to do with a lot of building technologies to ground the AI, make it so that it's factually correct, providing you references of its answers. And then on the second piece of bias, I think this one is honestly the one where AI is a reflection of the data you give it and the society that you want to create. And there's a lot of research that is happening in actually making data less biased. But I actually think there's an even earlier step where you can actually use AI to help people be less biased. So as people, we produce better data so that AI can then learn from and reflect on the way our society works. And when we build our own AI agents, for example, on MoonHub, and we build AI recruiters, the way we think about it is a lot more about how do we build these AI that help human recruiters be less biased, provide more open searches of profiles they might have otherwise not considered. And I think there is a step that we today can be doing to make it so that these systems are less biased in the future.
I think Nancy touched upon a really important point about the necessary the value of keeping human in the decision-making loop. It is all valuable to improve the unbiasedness, the fairness of the algorithms, and accuracy of the algorithm. But in addition to that, we should leverage the capability of experts with their domain expertise. They provide the safeguard rail for the algorithms. They provide the checkpoints, and they essentially supervise the algorithms and provide feedback to make the algorithm better, and also to make the decision itself better. Yeah, so I think we should, so in that sense, professionals, especially professionals with a lot of domain expertise experience, have a strong value-adding opportunity to the society still.
Great, thanks everybody. Unfortunately, our time is up, but I'm sure our speakers will be happy to exchange some ideas with our audience members in person after this live stream session. Thank you so much for coming for a very insightful and thought-provoking session. Thank you.